my legal name.
All right, hello and welcome. We are on today's episode with Marisa Hunter, and we are going to talk all things pleasure and erotic blueprint. So if this is new information to you, I'm sure your ears just perked up and you're excited to hear about it. And welcome today, Marisa. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yay! Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to join you today.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I am having Marisa on today to talk about pleasure and erotic blueprint to help all of us start unlearning the bullshit that we've been taught around our pleasure and our sexuality. And I know that Marisa has studied with Mama Gina and Jaya, and that has helped inform her along the way. But Marisa, I would really love for you to share your personal journey of, how and why you are, you got to where you are today, and just let us get to know you better, and let us know, what you got going on, girl.
Well, again, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be able to talk about these topics with you and your audience. Pleasure and sexuality are like hands down my two favorite topics to delve into with people. And like you said, it's such a journey of unlearning. And my journey began in Northern California, where I was born and raised in a really alternative community. And I feel really blessed for that, because it allowed me to see that the way that society inherently socializes us and teaches us about relationships, about sexuality, about how to move in this world, isn't necessarily the only way to be, as demonstrated by this, alternative community of hippies I was raised in.
That helps. That
helps. Due to life experience, the various traumas that one can experience over a lifetime, I really early on in my life started to realize and develop what I call my shiny people theory. And essentially that is at its essence that your energy affects mine affects yours. And the higher our vibration can be when we're together only benefits each other, and then the ripple effect out to our community. So I started to look around and be like, where are we not shiny? And one of the ways or places that I saw that we as humans are not allowed to shine very fully is in our sexuality. So from a very young age, adolescence, I knew that I wanted to work with sexuality, liberating sexuality, and allowing people to shine brighter just in their basic humanity. And so fast forward many years through a marriage, an unsatisfying sexual connection in a marriage, and various hits and misses with other intimate partners. I really feel like although I had that early awareness, I fell into what I had been socially cultured for, in terms of the place that a woman holds, the kind of pleasure we're allowed to have or ask for or not. And I really found myself in a place where I was like, there has to be more than this. And then fortunately, I came across Mama Gina, Regina Thomashauer, a feminist icon who works with women through her School of the Womanly Arts, and wrote a really incredible book called Pussy, a Reclamation. And the minute I found Mama Gina's work, I was like, here's someone who has the answer. This is a woman who's talking about pleasure and womanhood in a way that I'd never heard anyone talk about it before. And so I started studying with Mama Gina last year. And one of the biggest pieces that I got out of my work with her was the permission to experience pleasure as you define it and as it feels best to you, and the permission to stop doing activities that don't feel pleasurable, which was almost more powerful than the permission to do the pleasurable thing. Because here in society, women do get a certain amount of pass. Yes, you can take a hot bubble bath, and yes, we can have a nice glass of wine and eat some chocolates and strawberries, right? So there is a certain amount that's really available to us. But this notion of not settling for a pleasure that didn't feel great to me, however that may look. And that was really, really fundamental in allowing me to make a pivot, especially in my intimate relationships. But yet I still was kind of okay, now I have the permission to not do what I don't want to do. But how do I know what I do want to do?
Right, you're now what? Yeah.
Now what? And one of our guest speakers in Mama Gina's program is a sex educator named Jaya. And when Jaya spoke to our group, and she spoke of the framework that she created called the Erotic Blueprint, and the core Erotic Blueprint, everything just came into focus for me. And I was like, the same way I had felt about Mama Gina and pleasure, and like, here's the answer, is what I felt when I learned about Jaya and the Erotic Blueprints. Was here's the sexuality piece, here's the answer to that. Because again, I had never heard anyone explain sexuality with such a wide, well-rounded lens that accounted for so much more that was happening in my experiences and gave a language to something that no one had ever talked about before. And so that led me to pursue a coaching certification with Jaya. And I am now an certified erotic blueprint coach, trained in her methodology. And that forms between Mama Gina's pleasure theory and Jaya's erotic blueprint, really forms the basis of the work that I do with clients, and informs my philosophy about kind of best practices for pleasure and sexuality.
Absolutely. And I just love this journey, because I also did mastery with Mama Gina last year. And it's funny because we were talking about this earlier, where it's like, how did we not meet each other? And it's like, oh wait, there was like 2,000 or 1,000 women or 2,000 women, or how many freaking ladies there were in the the rooms that we were in. But I love the specifics almost around this, because I think a lot of the time when people hear the word pleasure, they automatically assume sex. They don't really, and to speak to what Mama Gina teaches, she does teach clitoracy and her teaching around a woman's clitoris and the pleasure piece in that respect, but she does dive into more of a holistic approach around pleasure, like having pleasure as our power to connect with our bodies and really being in our authentic truth. And then Jaya is like on the takes all of that and into this erotic blueprint piece, where you really get to understand your kind of like your home base, is how I consider it, for your pleasure style as it relates to sexuality specifically. So I think it's so powerful for you as a coach to have both of those foundations, because you can help people start to integrate both in a way that is pleasurable, and it's not like terrifying or like seems too much or too taboo or any of those things. So for those that haven't, because I speak a lot to pleasure in general, because that's also where I teach from as well. But for people that haven't worked with the Erotic Blueprint, how did pleasure get you to that piece, so to speak, around following? It sounds like you kind of followed the GPS and the inklings to get into Jaya's work, but how has it been for you around following your pleasure and working with Erotic Blueprints? And I guess what I'm asking is, let's talk about the Erotic Blueprints. I'm like, let's just talk about the Erotic Blueprints.
Let's just talk about the Erotic Blueprints. So with the Erotic Blueprints, basically the core Erotic Blueprint is a framework with which to look at and examine like how sexuality appears for you in your life. So it's this 360-degree view that within that has these 5 erotic types. And the 5 erotic types we can think of as a language. And so what we discover is that within the like spectrum of humanity, just as it is out in the outer world, some of us speak English, some of us speak Chinese, Chinese, Mandarin. Some of us speak French, right? And so when it comes to sexuality, you and your partner might be a different blueprint from each other. But that doesn't mean you're not compatible. What it means is that you speak different languages. And because we've never been taught that we have this breadth of language within our sexuality, oftentimes we're not living our maximum pleasure because we don't even know what's available to us, or that a different language could be learned. And so with the blueprints, the 5 general types are, I'm just going to go over them really quickly, and then I'm going to delve into them like a little bit deeper in each one. But you have an energetic type, a sensual type, a sexual type, a kinky type, and then a shapeshifter type. And within each of these, there is like superpowers to each of these archetypes. And then there's also a shadow side. And so as we talk about how that relates to pleasure too, the more that you can understand where your innate language lies, where your shadow sides lie, because even that in and of itself, like sometimes all of the answers live in the shadows, right?
That is
like
where
the
they
key
are.
to transformation is in those hidden parts.
Yeah, that's where the pot of gold actually is. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when you get to have a like fuller understanding of your own language and where your shadows may lie, then that allows you to both be more in alignment with yourself, like essentially in alignment with yourself, your yeses and your nos, and it allows you to communicate out into the world. So I see it as like these two congruent pleasures. One of them is like an upper level pleasure where it's the pleasure that we're feeling as we're getting touched and or touching ourselves, because I think self pleasure is really where it all starts at home, and we definitely don't need a partner to access our maximum pleasure. But then there's like,
can you repeat that for all the women who may have like learned otherwise? Can you
ladies, I am here to tell you, listen to Marisa. Pleasure starts at home, and we don't need a single other human to access our maximum range of pleasure. It all exists within us. We are whole and complete as we are, and we don't need any outside influence to have the most stunning amount of pleasure in our life. And we can choose to invite those other influences in and maximize, like add extra deliciousness, but it is definitely not necessary. Let me tell you, I've passed all of COVID with no partner, and my pleasure has not been forsaken.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to pause you there just because it's so important. That was one of the biggest takeaways for me from Mama Gina's program was when she talked about Biff, her, and she told the Biff story. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Mama Gina, or maybe you didn't hear this part of her story, but she had a neighbor growing up named Biff, and when she he was just like a neighbor, they were like brother, sister, whatever. And then one summer he had like the beach swoop hair and was like started filling out with muscles, and she was like, wait, who is this Biff neighbor? Kind of was like woke up to like him being attractive. And then they kissed, and she was like, my lips were bigger, and I went home thinking everyone would know, and like her whole entire body was turned on. And then she was like, every time she saw him afterwards, she was like, Biff! Like a cat in heat, just like Biff! And she talks about biffing it, and it's funny because it clicked in for me in a way that, and I had always thought like I had like all these like issues around men because of like daddy issues and different things. And I'm like, wait, there are women who have fathers that were great and they still have this outward seeking. And it's when she told this story about the biffing where she thought that he had turned on this pleasure and this place in her that was like out of her control. But really it was her waking up to what was possible in her own body. And then her, her whole life has been her journey around pleasure and learning and speaking and educating around that. But this piece of knowing that we can own our own pleasure and it's not dependent upon another human is so important for women to understand, because whether it's money or men or the car or the house or the security that we think we're going to get from an outside source, and that will get pleasure from that safety and contentment, which there is, you need that for your nervous system too. And it's this piece where whoever it is that comes in as your partner is in addition to, it's adding to the pleasure and the wholeness of your life. It's not to complete you. It's not to give you. It's not to put your emotional or pleasure home on something else outside of you. It's, I love that you said that, because it's your home base, not someone else's. So thank you for saying that too.
Totally. And that's why, again, it's this journey of unlearning, because we really have been, men and women alike, we've been taught that, there's another half that we're searching for, and that will make us complete. And even like, I live in Puerto Rico, and Spanish is the primary language here. There's an expression like, "Tú eres mi media naranja," you're the other half of my orange. And that to me is just like so telling about how we're looking always for this other piece of ourselves, as though it were something outside of ourselves, and truly it exists in us. And when we can really embrace that, unlearn the other part, and embrace that as women and as humans, that is so much power.
Yeah.
And in my world, I love power. It always feels better to me to have more agency, more choice. And so when we realize that we are capable of producing all of our pleasure within ourselves, that to me is just an amazing amount of self-agency, of self-empowerment. And so, yeah, I'm so glad that we stopped to talk specifically on that.
Yeah. And to add to that too, I think a lot of the time when I talk about this with people, they're like, yeah, but we're human and we need people and it feels better. And it's like, yes. And, you know, like we, as babies, as infants, we're one of the only creatures on the planet that need, like, we are completely helpless. Like we have to have, as humans, we're tribal in our, you know, in our ancestry, in our culture, we are tribal people. And when we speak to this around having your own agency and your own power and your own pleasure, it also gives you the autonomy to be a shinier, brighter, to what you speak of as shining people, to be a bigger light, to be a bigger presence, to be a bigger pleasure in service of yourself and others. So it's actually allowing you to be more, give more, have more, in the sense of your own home base. Whereas if you give your agency, your power, your pleasure, everything to other people, you have nothing left to give. You don't, and you're going to come from a survival place. So there's a difference in that respect. And I just want to point that out, because I think a lot of times when people hear that, like, yeah, but it feels better when I have sex with my partner. It was like, well, duh, like,
it's a both and.
Yes. And you can also get to know yourself and your body so well that your partner makes it that much better. So I just want to drop in right there with that, because I know I heard some of that in our stuff with Mama Gina too, of women being like, but I don't, and it's like, it's like, no. It's important. So anyway.
Yes. Point made and well made.
Yes. I had to drop in there. So.
Pleasure starts at home. You have power over it, and we can invite people in to enhance it. But really, we have all of that capability within ourselves, and our bodies are miraculous. And in fact, they were built for pleasure. I mean, I love this often touted piece of data for Mama Gina and others, but like, our clitoris has 8,000 nerve endings that are literally dedicated to nothing but our pleasure. That is not for naught. Like, as a being, and as a vibrational being, as an energetic being, we literally, pleasure is our birthright, and we were made for it. And that is the energy that will carry us further, faster, farther. And so hence why I'm like so impassioned for people to discover their authentic pleasure. And that comes in knowing your sexuality. And then it also comes in being in deep alignment and commitment to yourself, and knowing what are my commitments in this world. And as I am acting them out ever more every day, the pleasure that comes from that is incredible. And the pleasure of not turning away from the shadow. And being aware of the things, like the pleasure that can come from facing our pain head on, and welcoming it as a beautiful part of our range, and as an informer, you know. Like we said, the shadows is where the gold lives. So when we like have this is like, people would be like, it's pleasurable to go look at your pain. And it's like, yes, it is, because being in 100% like approval of oneself and what you have inside of you is deep pleasure. They're like, on a cellular level, your cells recognize when you are self-approving of them. And so then from there, you can build all these other yummy layers of pleasure on top. from sex or from the companionship or from a nice view, however pleasure, comes to you best. And so in terms of the erotic blueprints, and when we're not knowing what our innate sexual language is, it can keep us really out of alignment with our pleasure. Not just because of not knowing the yummy touches, but also because we're tolerating touch that doesn't feel so great to us and not understanding why, and oftentimes thinking that we're broken or wrong, and that something needs to be fixed within us because we're not conforming to this social norm of what sexual pleasure is supposed to look like. And so one of the archetypes, one of the languages is the energetic one. And this is one that, and we'll include in the show notes a link for you to be able to take a quiz. Jaya created a quiz, and it's a very easy 5 to 10 minute quiz that you can take that you can learn your erotic blueprint. So we'll provide that resource for people. And the energetic blueprint is a super powerful blueprint that before I had heard this work, I had never really heard people talk about this being available. But the superpowers of an energetic is that you can experience orgasm with no touch at all, that you thrive on tease and anticipation and the space in between touch and eye gazing and a slow approach, and like your bodies are like so sensitive that like
it's like the yearning.
It's the yearning and this highly tuned instrument.
Yeah.
And that is all so amazing. And then on the other side of that, in the shadow side, because of that incredible sensitivity and awareness, there is the capacity to short circuit if a partner or an energy just in general comes in too hard, too fast, too strong, too in your face. It can, for an energetic, it can be like, whoa, overload, the power breaker just flipped and now it's all off. Yeah. The other part of an energetic shadow could be a hierarchical thinking, meaning I'm a little bit better than you because I live in my higher chakras and I'm enlightened and I don't do porn and I am a tantrika. And so there is potential in the energetic to have a little bit of a judgment over the other blueprints, and especially the sexual blueprint that we've all been societally conditioned is the way that sexuality is expressed. You'll see when I get to that one. And so that's the energetic. And there are a huge amount of men and women who are energetics. And we've never been taught to appreciate that you could have so much pleasure from no touch at all. That can be such a revolutionary revelation to many of my clients. And because it's so outside of how we've ever seen the image of sexuality in movies and porn and advertisements, we never see a Reiki hand just hovering.
Right, we're like, right. Everybody be like, that's boring. What is happening? Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the energetic blueprint. And then the next one would be the sensual blueprint. And the sensual blueprint, their superpower is that their sexuality can be ignited by all of their senses, and they can experience full body orgasms that have nothing to do with the genitals. They can experience crygasms and laughgasms and chocolate-gasms.
We call those mouthgasms.
Mouthgasms. They are turned on by sense and touch and sight. All of the senses being engaged is really what is gonna get a sensual going. And in fact, they need all of that warm up to be able to enter into their sexuality. And so oftentimes we can be like, why aren't you just ready to go? Here we are, like erection, wet pussy, let's get it. And essential is like, can we cuddle first?
Yeah.
Can we build a connection? Can we have a slow burn into it? Can we let it unfold? And so those are some of the superpowers of the sensual. And then from the shadow side, what can happen with a sensual is that, on the flip side of the coin of their superpower, where they can be incredible space setters, they're going to light the candles and they're going to get the music just right and the bed will be made. On the shadow side, if some of those elements are not in place, it will be very distracting for them during sex. So if you've ever caught yourself during sex worrying about the dogs barking, or then you catch the sight of the sock on the floor and, oh my God, the temperature isn't just quite right. And it's like, I can't stay in this moment because this distraction is happening out here. That is very often an indicator of a sensual blueprint. And let's keep in mind that you could be dominant one and have secondary blueprints and also a little bit of all of it. So you may, as I start to describe these, you may be like, I see myself there and I see myself there.
I was gonna say, because I have some of that one too. Yeah. Yeah.
And what I love to remind everyone is that as humans, we are fluid beings. We are made up of 90% water. Fluidity is our nature. And so in everything in life, and especially in our sexuality, there is fluidity across the spectrum. And especially as cyclical beings, for myself, on ovulation week, I have a different blueprint than I do the week after. And to really start to recognize, wow, I could be fluid and there could be a predominant way that I access this, but then there's all these other layers that I can allow myself to explore, which is one of the things that's so beautiful as you start to delve into the blueprints, is to see, wow, there's such a breadth available to me. And so after the sensual, there's the sexual blueprint. And this is what we've all been taught to think sex is: genitals, cock and pussy, penetration, ejaculation, orgasm, wetness, and that can all be really beautiful. I'm a primary sexual. And so I want to know that we're going to get it on. Like,
this is happening.
I want to know that this is happening, that orgasm is going to be there. I want to get your cock out or get your pussy out first thing. That's how my innate wiring is driven. That is my primary blueprint.
And would you say this is very visual and physical? It's porn and
mm-hmm. And anything that you've ever seen.
Fluids are everywhere and all the things. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And pretty much 98% of porn is sexual blueprint in visual representation. And then even in our society, though, in movies, we don't see a lot of foreplay and if we do, maybe it's just a little bit of sensual, but then it's always dude's on top, you're kissing, he's penetrating, and that's the way that goes.
Yeah.
And so this can be great. There's so much superpower in the sexual blueprint and that enjoyment of genital stimulation and of that very visceral, I want it now. But the shadow side of it is that you could have a semi-limited definition of sex. And that you can be so focused on the end point, orgasm, that you don't enjoy the journey of getting there. And so from all the blueprints, there's the positive side and then the shadow side. And so if you ever catch yourself, for me, if my partner doesn't orgasm or I'm self-pleasuring and orgasm feels elusive, I start to get feelings of frustration creep in. And so maybe you can identify a time where you've been can't we just come? Let's get to it.
Yeah.
And that would be an indication of your sexual shadow side popping out. Now, the next blueprint is the kinky blueprint. And what I love about how Jaya teaches the kinky blueprint is that kink is whatever is taboo to you.
Which I love this, because when I thought of kink, I was always oh, I don't want to know any, it's weird. It's
whips and chains, and you're going to spank me, and 50 Shades of Grey, there's a dungeon.
I don't know. But I love that she said it's whatever is taboo or different, and it can be different for each person. So I love that, because I think people get really judgmental around the kinky. I know that I was for the longest time until I really heard Jaya's stuff. So, yeah, so I love that. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. It's beautiful. Yeah. And what we've been taught about kink is also a very like limited, narrow definition, right? That it's BDSM, that kink is BDSM, and that almost all religion and all culture would teach us that is shameful and wrong. And so kink lives in this hidden realm. But I really love to frame it for people. I mean, our brains are such beautiful organs and powerful creatures. But if someone had taught you your whole life that missionary style, missionary position was not allowed, that looking at your partner was like totally wrong, and that you should only do it doggy style, your kink could very well be missionary, the thing that we all think of as the most vanilla kind of sex, right? So really framing that kink is what is taboo to you as you've been, you know, through a collection of life experiences. And so perhaps kink could even be self-pleasure. There are a lot of people who got shamed around self-pleasuring as a child. And so then that became a taboo. And so even when you self-pleasure, you might be feeling like you're really stepping outside of the bounds of what's normal, and that could be your kink. And so kink is like this incredible open playground. It's really where like sexuality in general, I believe, is limitless. But kink is a realm where you could explore and explore and explore and really just have new discoveries all the time. And what's really beautiful too about kink is that you can kind of break it down into two different styles. There's psychological kink, and then there's physical kink. And psychological kink is in the mind. It's when we have like the fantasies and kind of the cat and mouse games. It is similar to, in that way, similar to the energetic, where it's the anticipation that comes with kind of playing in that realm of like what I could do to you later, you know, even whispering to myself, you know, like, oh, Marissa, I'm going to self-pleasure that pussy so good later. I'm like, ooh.
Oh, I haven't tried doing that for myself. I'm gonna do that. I love that. And this is around like fetishes too, because I have a friend that's like real into feet, and that to me is like, I'm like, that's so weird, but like he's really into it. So yeah, that's so funny.
And so yes, kink is the realm of where fetish lives. And then so there's psychological kink, and then there's sensation-based kink. And sensation-based kink might be a little bit more of what we've imagined it to be. It could be ropes and being tied up. It could be impact play with a flogger. It could be handcuffs and blindfolds. And so with kink, there's just so much room to play between that psychological kink and the sensation-based kink, and the taboo as defined by you really makes for this really, really fun playground of exploration. Where the major shadow side of kink is shame. Because it's based around our taboo, and we've been inherently taught that what is taboo is shameful and not to be recognized and to be stuck away in a dark corner. Kink can be a place where it feels scary and not fun to explore because of the shame piece. And so that's where I really like want to encourage people so much that like you are not wrong for having whatever desires you have, like radical permission and acceptance to combat shame. Shame is like my least favorite friend. I don't think that's where human growth and shiny people live, right? And so really what I love to impress to clients is just this sense of like, there's nothing wrong about you, and anything that you think may be shameful around your sexuality is actually probably one of your superpowers and to be celebrated. And that connects with Mama Gina too, like the range of our 88 keys, and that we have like, and the spectrums, we have the high notes and the low notes. And so often we're taught to just like keep the low notes out of the symphony. But when you neglect any part of that range, you are not getting the full capacity and the pleasure that is available to you. And so in the kink realm and in sexuality in general, like I try and slay shame with 2 tons of permission and reminders about how wonderful and perfect you are. And then another shadow of the kink could be that you can get into a rut. Like you find one thing that gets you off and then you go to that repetitively. So in terms of the fetish land, it might be like, wow, I have a fetish for feet. And so unless I'm self-pleasuring to an image of a foot, I'm just not going to come. And so for Kinkland, that can be a place where the shadow can lie. It's just that rut that you can find.
And is that where people maybe get stuck with porn too? Is that like that addiction where, because I've heard of some people that actually it's harder for them to orgasm when they're not watching porn, like versus with a real person.
Yeah, it can be. And in general too, in the brain, like when we start to rely on one pathway, one neural pathway, and we walk that neural pathway every time, it gets really deeply ingrained. And then the brain takes the easiest route that it knows. And so it's going to try and hop on to this well-worn pathway, even when we have intention for something else. And that's why I think this work is so powerful too, is to be like, wow, I have 100 different pathways I could take, not just this one. And it can also even happen in self-pleasure, not just in porn, but in the like physical positioning of your body. Like I'm going to grab my left boob with my left hand, and I'm right-handed. So I'm going to like stimulate my clit with my right hand. And I'm always going to take that two positions, right? And that's the way I'm going to self-pleasure every time. And sure, I know that can achieve orgasm in a short period of time, but I'm creating that rut. So that could be in Kinkland, and then it can also just be, it's part of humanity brain land of the way that we create neural pathways. And then the last blueprint is called the shapeshifter. And the shapeshifter is a combination of all of the prior four: the energetic, the sensual, the sexual, and the kinky. And so shapeshifters, their superpower is that they can be turned on by any of those realms. And they have a huge, huge capacity for pleasure. They can, sometimes the more hands, the better, although that does not define shapeshifter, but the more hands, the more energy. Let's go for hours. Let's go for orgasms. Let's go for sensual massage. I want it all. I can stay here all day. And that's really, really beautiful. Where it can be a shadow side for shapeshifter is that because it's so easy to switch to into any of the other blueprints, and if you're partnered, you can sometimes end up only playing in your partner's blueprint and end up in blueprint land. And in coach lingo, we talk about feeding the blueprints or being starved. Yeah. And so a shapeshifter might only be getting one of their blueprints fed, i.e. the blueprint of their partner, and then they're actually starving for their other blueprints. And then another piece of shapeshifter is often, and in relation to the shame, they might get told they're too much. You want too much. You're never satisfied. We just had sex for 2 hours. Like, can you give me a break? You're too much. And so it can lend to someone curling into themselves, being like, shit, if I'm too much, how do I make myself not too much so I'm enough, I'm the right, right? And so you can then start to close off some of your blueprints and start to starve yourself even. And so that's where Shadowland can live for shapeshifter. And it's actually my true belief that most of us are shapeshifters in our essence in some way or another. And I talk about like how the blueprints, you start looking at them in the bedroom, but then the more familiar you get, you can see them everywhere in your life outside of the bedroom. And so you may never like be essential in the bedroom, but out in the outer world, in your business, you may have a very like mama bear caretaker energy where you want to set the scene perfectly for your client and you want to make sure they're comfortable and that the temperature is right for them and they have water. And that is essential blueprint in action, right? And so we can look at these pieces of ourselves and be like, okay, I am predominantly this, and in my sexual life, I may be this, but really these blueprints exist in me and I can see them all over the place. And I really see like in business for myself, I see my sexual blueprint strongly in terms of like business negotiations. Like, let's cut the chit chat. Let's get to the point. Like,
yeah, I'm kind of that way too. Yeah.
right. So, and I see my sensual shadow of one of the sensual shadows can be like, cause they don't like mess and fluid and whatnot. It's like, if I'm at the gym and I see a bunch of sweaty people dripping their sweat onto a machine, I'm like, ew, I don't even want to go on that treadmill after you've been on it. Right. And so there's my sensual shadow loud and clear in a place that is not related to sex at all. My brain isn't even thinking about sex.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how I like about how this relates to pleasure too, is that when you can start to see and utilize your blueprints and see where your superpowers are, see where the shadows lie, it can inform your pleasure outside of the bedroom too. And you can come into deep alignment with your yeses and your nos. And so for me, the blueprints is a way to describe our sexuality, but it's also a way to describe how can we have greater pleasure in our life overall as well. And that's what is one of the things that excites me the most about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's such a great awareness and tool, like you said, to be able to explore, like, how is this showing up in different areas? And something, because my best friend is really into Jaya, and she did a course with her too. They were talking about how your blueprints can actually change. Like when you're in your first like honeymoon phase of a relationship, you might tend to be more sexual. I think she was saying something about where initially you might be more one initially, and then over time as you come back into like your more like dominant blueprint, that it might be kind of confusing for partners. And I would love to speak around, because I know with me being more like, when I did my own test, it showed, you know, dominant, but there were some that were even. So it was kind of pretty full spectrum for me on the percentages. But I know when I'm first in a relationship, I tend to be more sexual, and then I'm an energy and sensual and like kinky. So those were all kind of like even, but I know that when I was with a sexual partner, over time, like they're being still sexual and me kind of being like, whoa, I didn't know how to communicate it at the time. Where that's where this work is so beautiful, around just having that awareness of yourself of like, okay, these are the things that I actually need to get to be fully expressed, to get to feel my full pleasure in a way that feels really good to me, versus just trying to satisfy your partner or whoever you're with at the time, and then feeling that shame around like, maybe there is something wrong with me that I don't want sex as much as they do, or maybe I am being judgy about their sexuality because I'm coming from a hierarchy place, or, you know, like what, or the my friend that likes speed, and I'm always like playfully like, that's so weird, but it's like, it is a turn on, you know, like in some ways or whatever. But like getting to understand those aspects of yourself is so important, to not being in shame and to being able to like really articulate what is your yes or no, like you were saying, with your pleasure in your own body. And we're not taught how to do this, you know, like unless you're working with you or Jaya or, you know, coaches, like we're just, it's not a mainstream thing. It is taboo or kinky for us to even be having these conversations.
To have this conversation is actually pretty forward for so many people. There might be people who watch this and are like, how can they even talk about this open?
I hear pussy,
right?
and
Because
like,
pussy, like, exactly. And one of the things that I love that you're touching on right now is the communication piece. And like, so one of the things that we do as blueprint coaches is that we first identify like, where are your blueprints? And one of the most powerful pieces of this work that I haven't mentioned yet is the somatic component. And somatic means in the body. And, you know, one of the beautiful things is that our mind is so powerful, but actually our body holds our innate wisdom, right? And so what can also often happen is that you can take the quiz, and when you take the quiz, you're taking it from a mental place. And so those blueprint results that you get with the quiz, it's not to say they're not accurate, but it's also to say it's just one piece of the puzzle. Because as coaches, what we then do is we take that information and then we start to apply it to your body and listen to what your body says somatically. And then once we know how your body is responding, and what can be so amazing is like, my left arm could be sensual, and it turns out my right arm could be kinky, and that my pussy is energetic. And you can really start to do work on the body to see, where are my responses and what does my body have to tell me? And then taking that a step further, what we do in terms of speaking, so we'll like find your blueprints, and then we want to feed them. We want you to feel really, really satisfied, especially in your primary blueprint as we're starting the work. And from that place of satisfaction and deep pleasure, which inherently starts to release any shame and like gets us more excited to delve more, we start to learn to speak the blueprints. And as it turns out, every blueprint has a different language, both in words, in tone of voice, and in body language. And tone of voice and body language are often way more important than the actual words that they like. And so I don't know if you've ever had the experience, but you're having sex with somebody, you're having a great time, and then they say something to you and you're like, fuck, I wish you had not said that, because now I'm totally turned off. Like, like whatever the thing be, like that just did not hit my ears in the right way. And now pussy is like, no. And so not just, as I've spoken before about this knowledge empowering you to know your yeses and nos, like what kind of touch you want, but as you learn to speak the blueprints, you can learn to actually identify, what are the words that I like? Maybe I like pussy. Maybe I like sacred portal. Maybe I like cum hole. You know, like.
I haven't heard that one. I'm like, okay, all right.
Without any shame or judgment to any of that, what we do is we play what we call oral word games, not ORAL, but AURAL.
Oh, I love that.
I love alliterations. I love plays on words. I'm such a word nerd. I'm just so tickled by oral word games. But we'll play oral word games with our clients. And we'll give them, say, sets of words to them. And we look for, what does the body do? Does the body give us an no, a turn away, or does the body open up? And you're like, wow, I never thought that like dirty cum hole would be the thing, but it turns out
right, you're just
that's
like,
the thing. And it can be mind blowing, and it can also quickly cause shame to rise up. Which, you know, then we go and we're like, we work on that to be like, let's put the shame away, because we are perfect and whole. There's nothing shameful about us, whether it's the language we like or not. And then we learn to see not just the vocabulary words, but the way that something's communicated. You know, an energetic might need distance. Like, the further away I am communicating to you, the more receptive you'll be to my message, versus me being right up here in your face, I want to fuck you. Right? And so the blueprints give so much power as well into the communication piece, and having that capacity to really both know for yourself and then tell the people that you're interacting with in the world how they're going to best be able to give you pleasure, and then vice versa too. And I love that piece of that one of the things that gives me pleasure is knowing that I could give my partner pleasure. And so being empowered with this erotic blueprint knowledge too, like, I recommend everyone, if you're on a dating app, if you're partnered, whether you're partnered or not, but if you're out on the dating apps, have every person that you've talked to take the blueprint quiz. It makes great first conversation fodder. Like, you're definitely going to have a really interesting first date, and you're going to get to know like what you're working with and how you could have a juicier encounter with that person. So that's totally
that. I'm like, I'm single, so I'm like, I don't even do that. Just because it gives you like a peek into like, it's an intimacy thing. It's like it's something personal. It's conversational. It allows you to start your a relationship off with making it not be shamey or weird or like. I think that's so awesome. Thank you.
And should you take it to a physical place, you already are so empowered, both of you. Because also, I mean, I could get on this tangential soapbox so easily, but like, we have never been taught to have a conversation with humans. I took a sex education class last year, and they talked about a sex elevator speech. Hi, my name is Marisa.
I love
This
it.
is the kind of touch I like. This is the kind of touch I don't like. This was the last time I was tested for STDs. This is my partnered status. Like, we don't have those conversations with people before we get intimate with them most often,
And we
because
should be like,
and
we
we
should
all
be.
should be.
Yeah.
And when it comes to consent, I mean, how powerful is this? And like, even I had a recent experience where through doing this work and really understanding my yeses and nos, you know, one of the things that's interesting, I would say, for me, because I am so strongly sexually imprinted, is I really don't want to see nudes of people until I've established an intimate relationship with them.
Yeah.
And so I definitely don't want your cockpot pic
Don't
showing up in my
send the
inbox.
eggplant pics, please.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because we're not taught to have those kinds of consent conversations, even for myself, like, so I get comfortable with the lover and then I want to send them maybe a naked selfie. I've learned, like, you ask first. Hey, would you care to receive this kind of image from me? And the more that we have conversation around this, the more we normalize it all. And because the blueprints gives us so much language that we don't have otherwise, we can then have way deeper and more satisfying consent conversations so that you don't get unwanted pictures in your inbox, or you don't get asked for pictures you don't want to send, and that it's just can be so clearly communicated out there in the world. And so, I don't know, just talking about what I always come back to is like, that pleasure comes from knowing your yes and your no, being able to speak it, and also knowing like where my turn on comes from, and then where the person who I'm engaging with, where their turn on comes from, and finding a place to meet into the middle. And then that also speaks to another thing that you were talking about, which is how blueprints can shift. And there is just a certain element of biological chemistry that happens that when you first, the honeymoon phase, when you first get together, we are programmed for procreation. So we're programmed for
Babies.
a little bit more of a hot babies, right?
Yeah.
So yes, the sexual blueprint, which is more like, let's have cock in pussy. And I'm using very heteronormative terms today too. Like, let me just make that disclaimer. I should have made that disclaimer at the very beginning of this conversation, because I live in a spectrum kind of world, not in a binary kind of world. So even for myself, my own orientation and gender is fluid day to day. But for sake of example, I'm using very heteronormative terms today. And also because we're cultured that way. Thank goodness the world is changing and we get to see more images on television. But as we think of sex as like a penetrative male organ, female organ union, in the beginning stages of intimacy, we can show one blueprint more than the other. And even as our awareness of our capacities expand, one of the pieces that we do work with as coaches, erotic blueprint coaches with clients, is the expansion piece. And the thing with expansion is that it's hard to do unless you're feeling really, really resourced in the places that you already feel comfortable. So we start with resourcing you first, the feeding and the finding out where my primary ones are, feeding that, and then going forward. And like I said, I actually do believe we're all shapeshifter in our essence and have that capacity. And I also talk about something that I call the gateway blueprint. And this is kind of Marisa's twist on Jaya's work, but how I mentioned before too about as for myself, as I move through my cycle, that my blueprint switches. What I have found is that if I know what my gateway blueprint today is, and I can open that gate first, oftentimes I can get to other places that I wouldn't have unless I had started with that pathway. So the week after my period, I am more of a sensual blueprint. And what that then means is that doesn't mean that I can't get sexual or I can't get kinky, but it means that I'm in that phase. I'm going to need you to come, or my partner, or even myself, as I self-pleasure, I'm going to need to take time and give my sensual the opening and the feeding. And then that can then lead into other kinds of play. So in terms of expansion, there's expansion in the realm of learning a new blueprint and actually starting to receive turn on from it, instead of just like, yes, I can do this for you, partner, right? Like I can give you the massage because you're the sensual and you want it. And as you expand, you might actually really start to get into the pleasure of the massage as well. And then there's the expansion that is more based on like, where do I open the gates first? And where does that allow me to go?
I
And
really
again,
love
this is so fucking exciting because this opens like just so much new territory that I had never known was even available to me or to other people.
Yeah, and that's where I love that you do the cycle syncing, because that's huge for me, especially someone that is working around endometriosis, which is like the most painful periods that you can have. And
Yes.
and learning how to cycle sync is like, that's incredible to me, as far as for women to really be able. Well, and I think men go through cycle, they have their own cycles as
They
well.
do as well.
But I love that you have the gateway, because it's true. Like, we are rhythmic and we're cyclical, and we are gonna have different, desires and needs from week to week, and so that's really powerful.
And as you're talking about that, today I've really concentrated on the 5 blueprint types. But when we started the conversation, I was talking about the core erotic blueprint and the like 360-degree view of your eroticism. And so there are 2 other elements that come into the blueprint work that we do. And one of them is the stages of sexuality. And then another is obstacles/pathways of sexuality. And what that is that the stages, you could be in a resting state, i.e., I'm not having sex right now because I'm on my painful period and I just don't want to. And that does not negate your sexuality. So we often think if we're in a sexless relationship, which would be the resting stage, that means that something's wrong with me, that my sexuality is dead. And that's not the case at all. It just means that your system is in a place of needing to take a pause and a break. And that could be because of any number of reasons: injury, trauma, chosen celibacy for spiritual purposes. And so as we like are humans and we shift cyclically to just give ourselves so much grace and permission and love, being like, whether I'm in a resting state or another state would be a healing. So post-pregnancy, or you've just had your, meniscus repaired, or if I'm in a curious state, like I have now discovered the blueprints and I never knew that I could potentially be a sensual blueprint. So now I'm going to go do a bunch of research about what that means. That could be the curious state. Or an adventurous state, like, okay, I'm ready to take my knowledge and take it out to the world, and let's try this thing and that thing. Or even the last state is transformational, where you're using sex practices for higher connection with spirituality, sex magic, to manifest into reality your hopes and dreams. So this like notion of fluidity in terms of where am I with the blueprints, and then a fluidity of where am I with the states or stages. And then the last piece is like, where am I with my pathways or obstacles? I say pathways and obstacles because they can be one and the same. If it's working against your sexuality in a way that's prohibiting it, it's an obstacle. And then when you heal that, it suddenly becomes this great pathway. And so the pathways or obstacles could be physical. So that could be that you broke your tailbone at some point. And so there's certain positions that are just never going to feel comfortable. It could be a recent accident. It could be any number of physical conditions that could be playing into that. Another one of the pathways or obstacles would be chemical. So that's with our hormones and our neurotransmitters. These are things that I also no one had ever talked to me about in terms of sex education, but like your neurotransmitters, whether you're GABA dominant or dopamine dominant, can have a different effect on your sexuality. And I can also provide a link for an easy online resource to check your dopamine, your neurotransmitter dominance. And that can be just highly telling. And if there's imbalances there, then you can supplement and it can change things for your sexuality. And it's like never had I been told that my brain chemistry in that way could be affecting what's happening with my pussy. And then beyond that, there's the emotional piece. And the emotional piece is the pieces that we've been given through religion, through our families of origin, through positive or negative experiences, early sexual experiences. And so there can be the need to do some emotional work and integration before you can fully embrace different blueprints or the blueprint that you're currently in. And then lastly, there's the energetic piece. And so we are relating back to shiny people. We are energetic beings before we are anything else. We are created with sparks of energy. Our cells are energy, right? And so in the energetic piece, there's two different pieces that we can look at. We can look at how sensitive we are to the energies around us in terms of radio waves, microwaves. Like you might be prone to headache with too much time in front of a computer screen. And all of those things can affect also our sexuality. And then there's the piece of energy that is what we call polarities. And so if you think of two magnets, magnets can attract or they can like pull away from each other. And so as an energetic piece of sexuality, the polarities come into place. And if you're too aligned in your energy, that could start to create like a roommate situation with your partner. And so sometimes when couples transition into more of a sexless stage, it can be because the polarities have shifted and are not in the right dynamic to create that like juicy magnetic draw in, right? And or it could be creating a grind. So we look at those pieces too. And within those three kind of main frameworks of the blueprint types, the stages and states, and the pathways and obstacles, we get this really well-rounded view of your sexuality and this like endless capacity to know I can be fluid through any of them and that I am a changeable being. And so at no point am I broken or wrong or unfixable, because all of these things are learnable and fluid across spectrums.
Oh, I love this all so much because I've experienced like a range of all of these things, of being in a relationship where there's no longer sex because we're so in alignment, or the other where it's like we're grinding. And in the past I hadn't had there was no way for me to articulate that. Or so like having this knowledge, I think, is just, it's so healing and helpful for individuals and for partnerships, and just in taking the fucking shame out of everything. It's like, just let's take the shame out of all of this.
It's such like this shame slayer. I feel like this work is such a shame slayer because you're like, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just in a resting phase.
Yeah.
And in this society, we're supposed to be like sexual all the time, right? You're supposed to be ready to go on a moment's notice with one glance and one touch on your clit, and now you're ready to go. And it just doesn't necessarily work that way. And it can, but it doesn't always. And so when we realize like who I am in this moment as I present right now is perfect and whole, nothing needs to be changed about me. And from this place that I am right now, I can choose my pleasure, and I can choose more pleasure, because based on like where I am today, I can give myself that. And that is so, so much power. And then it comes back into the ripple effect on the world. And then as you walk through the world, you are creating the ripple effect of shiny energy, of positive output. And so it not only benefits you, but it benefits everyone around you. And hence why I'm such a fierce advocate that I really believe everything, like that the erotic blueprint in its entirety, the core erotic blueprint, should be just basic sex education for everybody. Because this is just an incredible, incredible way of knowing who I am is perfect, where I'm at is perfect, and I can always make choices to change that if I so desire.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so embodied, and giving the words and the understanding for people is really where we get our power from, is having the embodiment, having the articulation, and like the inner awareness. And I was curious too, because I know Jaya's background, she healed a lot of her own personal trauma in her process of all of this and creating it, understanding herself. Can you speak to that too, around like how, I don't know if she, you know, from what she's educated, or if you touch on this with people too, because that's also, you know, is for me having trauma in my background, being a trauma conscious coach, I think this is a huge piece where shame is like the core of trauma, of internalized trauma. So I'm just curious around your ideas around how any of this can help people heal their own past trauma, as far as like anchoring or resourcing or having the ability to, just articulate what's up for them and that kind of thing.
Certainly. So I think that one of the things that slays shame the most is light and acceptance. And what I mean by that is like almost like shining the spotlight on that dark corner and saying to that piece, I love you. You are accepted. You are a beautiful part of me. In that same way, connecting it back to Mama Gina, that our dark emotions are almost some of our most beautiful pieces. And so when you say to shame, like, thank you for being here, and like, I'm going to nurture you out of that corner with love and acceptance, tends to just do worlds of wonder to dissipate shame. And so I think one of the biggest shame slayers with this work is that it gives language to a normalcy, because a lot of shame comes out of feeling not normal or wrong for what you're feeling and have experienced, and reactions that you've had during traumatic experiences, especially. There can be so much shame that arises out of our survival instincts and traumatic experiences. At least in my personal experience, there is a bit of that too. Like, how could I, I'm very open about these things, but in terms of sexual trauma, how could I have enjoyed any part of that non-consensual encounter? And there can be shame arising from that. And then to like understand, no, there's physiological responses that happen with the body regardless of the circumstances. And knowing those things and having a language around them is so key. And then additionally, as blueprint coaches, another tool that we employ is a set of techniques called accelerated evolution. And what they are they're fairly simple, kind of guided visualization techniques where you go in and you duplicate the charge that you have. And in that duplication, like what you resist persists. And so what we do is we go in there and we don't resist it. We allow it to be. And then in that very allowing of it to be, the charge can dissipate. And so through the accelerated evolution processes, which is a second certification that Jaya offers with her blueprint certification, coaching certification, it's a powerful, powerful set of tools for shame release through this process of duplication. And so that's one of the tools that we uniquely use in this methodology for shame, and kind of dissipating and releasing and integrating long-held charge, pain, and struggle, and integrating positive character traits that we want to emulate and have more of in our life. So specifically within this work and as an erotic blueprint coach, that is one of the tools that we use for shame. And then overall, outside of that, if you weren't engaging in a coaching container with an erotic blueprint coach, just knowing these 5 erotic types, the 5 stages, and the 4 pathways is a huge shame slayer in the normalizing of experience that I think is really, really powerful.
Yeah, and I feel like it's so important to touch on this because I feel like it's like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women have been abused on some level, whether it was in childhood or rape or there's so many different, or just unwanted touch when you have sex with someone, even if you aren't really feeling it, whether that is a stranger or a partner, like there's so many ways that we can experience trauma in our bodies and having these tools and getting to release the shame and getting to understand that even if our body, because our clitoris has 8,000 nerve endings, even if our body was turned on, it doesn't necessarily mean that like at our core, the situation, wasn't harmful or whatever. So I'm really glad that you touched on this too, because it's so important for women to like understand there's tools out there for them that they don't have to let their sexual pleasure, their sexual expression, and their femininity, their sensuality be affected by a past trauma to the point where they can't experience pleasure or healing or really a reclamation of themselves, because I think a lot of women get stuck in the trauma and don't feel safe or comfortable expressing their sexuality because it was violated and or stolen from them on some level. And so this is such a powerful space for you to help women really like reclaim that for themselves, and just for women to know that it's available is just absolutely important. So,
and in that vein, I have two kind of things that popped up for me as you were talking about that. One is just another resource and a book that I think every sexual human should read, not just women, but it's a book by an author, Emily Nagoski. It's called Come As You Are. And it goes a little bit more into the science of sexuality, but she talks about a phenomenon called arousal non concordance, which hits on something that you were just saying, like in a traumatic experience, your body can have a physical reaction that has nothing to do with your actual arousal. Another good example of that is like the young man in, early adolescence in math class that gets the erection out of nowhere and then gets called to go up to the front of the room, right? Like, so
which
arousal non concordance.
That would be so embarrassing.
I mean, speaking of shame, right? But if we all knew that arousal non concordance was a thing from the very first time we got taught sexuality, we wouldn't have shame, because we would just look at that erection and be like, arousal non concordance, it's a normal thing. I don't have to be ashamed of it. So I highly recommend that book for all women. It's really, really powerful, the teachings that she shares in that book. And then another piece is, and this is like coming back to more of my whys that I do this work. So one of my huge whys that I've already talked about is the shiny people theory, that like the sensation that I have that if someone were to live their whole life closeted from their innate pleasure, whether that's, heterosexual or anywhere on the gender and sexuality spectrum, like to live a whole lifetime of not being able to really live your truth out there is one of my huge whys. And then another huge why is that I have this firm belief that a lot of sexual activity that happens because of shadow would not have happened if we had this information and knew other ways of accessing our pleasure that didn't involve violating the consent of another human being. And I had several different experiences of molestation in my childhood, and I'm pretty sure, and I could be wrong, this is just all my personal opinion, but I'm pretty sure that if those humans had been armed with this kind of information, they wouldn't have been looking for their pleasure in Shadowland. And then that keeps everybody safer and healthier. And so, that's another one of my whys of why I think it's so, so important that we all learn this work, because it empowers us to like live in the light side of sexuality versus the shadow side of sexuality.
Yeah, I love this so much, because it's all about a part of our collective healing journey, because I can't even imagine what the world would be like if this information was taught to kids, and whenever you start learning about it in middle school or before like even just at home, having this education for the development of your kids so that they're fully aware of their own power, their own pleasure, their own bodies, coming back to like what we started in the beginning, is this like sense of like, I have control of that. It's not coming from external sources, and having the ability to articulate it to, to speaking to that is so important. So
and to understand that sexuality is a completely normal and human part of ourselves that blossoms way earlier than a lot of us would even want to recognize. And to say, okay, that can blossom, and there are ways for it to blossom in such pleasurable, safe ways for everybody, the individual and the humans that surround them. And so I think of sexual liberation not just as like, yay, let's go have fun and have great sex, but sexual liberation as a way of really increasing like our humanity with each other, the collective energy of the planet, and as an essential piece of recognition of who we are as beings.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Well, I've loved this conversation so much, and I would love for you, we will have the links that we had talked about listed in the description as well. But Marisa, I would love for you to let people know how they can find you and contact you, and I'll of course have those listed as well. But if you want to let them know where what you got going on and where they can contact you. That'd be great.
Wonderful. Well, I can be found on social media on Instagram at Marisa Tells All, MarissaTellsall, Marisa Tells All. And I can also be found on Facebook as Marisa Hunter. Those are where you can contact me on my socials. At my Instagram, you can find the link to the Blueprint quiz as well. So we'll connect a link in with these show notes, but you can get that through my Instagram as well. And right now I have an offering for one-on-one coaching. I do a 6-month container with women, any human, human with an X. I love to work with all spectrums of humanity, couples, individuals. And so if you were interested in learning more about what coaching with me would look like, you could go ahead and send me a DM through my Instagram, through Facebook, or also my email, which we'll have available, but that's just really simple, marissahunter@gmail.com, MarissaHunter@gmail.com. And I would love to have a conversation with you to see if I would be a good fit to help you explore your erotic blueprints and your sexuality and how to increase pleasure in your life.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Make sure to get a hold of her if you are curious about any of the things, or if you're in a resting period and you and your partner want to revamp. Like, she's got all of the info.
I've got all the tools for all the things.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on today, Marisa. This is fantastic conversation.
Oh my gosh, Nicole, it has been such a pleasure. Speaking of pleasure, this has been such a pleasure and a delight. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak with you and your audience. And I just wish everyone an incredible, delicious day filled with pleasure, how you define it and how it feels best to you.
Awesome. Same to you, and thank you.
Thank you.